Well, hello and welcome, awesome students, to week number 5. We have officially passed the halfway point in the course. Do a little celebration dance, right? Half done, half to go. Roughly half the workload is behind us, assuming you're caught up in the course. But we still have a lot of things to do moving forward, i.e. Project 2 will be coming up here in a couple of weeks, but a lot of things we're going to be taking care of. Let's dive into it. Let's talk about the assignments this week and the expectations so you know what to expect. As we dive into Module 5 this week, we're going to start to talk about proposed changes. Now, a lot of what we've been talking about up until now was looking for a problem or identifying a problem, where this week we're going to start talking a little bit more about we've found your problem, and here's what we're going to do in terms of proposing some type of solution or change within the organization. We're going to talk about 2 different tools you might utilize to do such a things, and one of which is going to be storytelling, as I mentioned earlier. We're also going to do something where we're going to take a look at what we call a bonefish or a fishbone diagram. There's a couple of different terminologies for something like that. Sometimes you might hear it referred to as a herringbone or an Ishikawa diagram or something along those lines, cause and effect diagram. So we're going to talk about those types of tools this week. Incidentally, that diagram should be the quicker of the 2 assignments to complete. And the one caveat, the catch that I mentioned earlier, is the assignment expectation is earlier, but there's some things you might have to figure out along the way and learn the process before you tackle these assignments. And that's why I say there's a little bit less in terms of workload this week with a little bit of catch. You first have to learn the process. And so let me talk about the research and the resources this week, because you are going to want to spend some time going through these resources this week, as that's really going to get you on track for understanding how to do the assignments this week. It's a little bit of information, background information, kind of need to know stuff as you go into it. And some folks might have an easier time with some of this than others. If you have some experience with presentations, that will certainly help. But the first article up to bat here is the 4 basic elements of great storytelling, as we talk about these 4 key elements here: structure, characters, conflict, and resolution. And I missed one here, but short, brief story to just give you an overview in terms of storytelling. Storytelling is quite important when we're presenting a solution back to a company, presenting the results. And some of the things that we talk about in terms of good storytelling is the neuroscience behind it. If we can create a compelling argument with some good elements in it, and there's an emotional aspect to it, it's going to be much more impactful to the audience. And so here's some things it's talking about. Well, from the psychological perspective, that's what makes us really great at doing IO kind of work, is we have that psychology background to understand some of these key elements. And when we're giving that story or talking about that story, look to driving or connecting on an emotional level with our audience can go a long way. There's an article here from Harvard Business Review, Storytelling That Drives Bold Change. This is a fantastic article, a little bit on the lengthy side, but it really dives deep into different elements of storytelling, kind of the hows and whys behind it. Now, there's one little catch on this, and you might experience this, maybe not, where you can see down at the bottom here, you're out of free articles. I know we've had a couple Harvard Business Review articles in this class. I'm honestly not sure what the allotment is. I know sometimes websites will cookie you if you've seen 1 article or 2 articles for the month. That's all they're going to let you do unless you subscribe. So I've gone ahead and found this article on the internet, and I'm going to provide a link down below, so you may be able to just access it right inside the course by clicking on the link. If not, make sure and check the link down below. This will give you access to the article. Again, it's a really good background in terms of learning the key elements of storytelling. Classic storytelling techniques for engaging presentations, which this is really key, gang, because we're going to be developing a presentation this week with a compelling story. So again, this is going to talk about the different types of storytelling. We look at something, we might have a hero, we've got cases where we might have a giant buildup before we get to the key points, etc. And you're going to see in here that there's a number of TED Talks that are connected to these. Gang, I love TED Talks, and I can tell you pretty much every TED Talk, the reason why they're so good is because they're good storytellers. So watch a couple of these TED Talk presentations, and this will really give you an idea of the direction you're working toward in developing a story. So a couple other things to look at is in terms of presenting data to create a compelling story. Rather, it's a good YouTube video that talks about that here. And then we're going to talk a little bit about something else, and we're going to look at some of those things into a root cause. And that's when we're going to get into something called a fishbone diagram. Now, again, this is one of those times when you're going to need to read an article. I believe it's actually a chapter from a book about a fishbone diagram. Now, when you get down here, the abstract is not really going to give you the information that you need. So make sure you click on this link, this download link here, and it's going to open up the full article, and you'll be able to read more in detail about what a fishbone diagram is, or herringbone diagram. There's a couple of different terms that we use for these things, and then a video that will take you through some of the key elements as well. So again, some prep you're going to have to do in terms of learning how to do some of these things, and some of you might have some good experience. I personally graduated from an undergrad program where every single class I wrote papers. I typically would write a 3 to 5 page paper almost every week for the entire program. And also in every class, we had at least one, and often two, sometimes three presentations every single class, and these were live classes. So there was two things that I learned very well. I learned how to write very well, and I also learned how to do presentations. And so I know that some of you don't necessarily have that experience. It's okay. So go through these materials. It's going to help you. And I'm also going to put together another little quick snippet in terms of PowerPoint. Talk about that here hand in hand with this. Let's take a look at the assignments this week. And this is one of those times when I'm going to provide you with a little extra tip I didn't talk about in the beginning, because I want to see who's paying attention and watching the video all the way to the end, because I'm going to give you a little tip that's going to help to make this process easier for you in completing the assignments this week. Now, there are 2 different assignments this week. And if you go through the structure there, you just kind of went down the page in order. When you look at the module, you're going to see that module 5 presentation is listed first. And the second one is the milestone 2 that's on here that I mentioned. Maybe you want to do this one first because it's a little bit easier in terms of the workload. Okay, there's also another reason why you might want to do it first. So pay attention as I go. Let's see if you catch on. This particular submission is going to give you a scenario in which you're going to complete a fishbone diagram. Now, if you go down to the bottom here, you can download the template where you see in Microsoft Word that you have your presentation here, your template here of what you're doing, where you're going to create a fishbone diagram. Now, looking at this now might not make a whole lot of sense to you, but I assure you, after you go through the reading materials, a lot of this is going to make perfect sense for you, where you're going to identify some causes related to workforce, method, material, and measurements. You might have a second cause that you put in, or some additional notes that you put in here. Again, you're going to see what I mean as you go through the reading materials this week. It will start to make a lot more sense to you. There are 2 other tools that you're going to utilize here in terms of resources, milestone, job satisfaction, benchmarks, as well as the organizational documents, which I should have down below here. Let's see how organize. There we go. There's the organizational structure, which you could maybe identify people's names if you want to put some things here as you go through to help you create a visualization of what you're doing. That part might not be so important for this particular assignment, but pay attention. It'll make more sense here in a moment. There's also some statistical information in here in terms of quantitative and qualitative information that's going to help you to make a good analysis for this particular submission, for your fishbone diagram. We look at fishbone diagrams. There's a couple of different ways that we'll use in terms of terminology, where sometimes we call these things a cause and effect diagram. Here's the causes of all the problems. Here's what it's resulting in. Sometimes they refer to this as a herringbone diagram or an Ishigawa. In manufacturing, and this is one thing that it applies to, we talk about the 5 M's mostly, and that's manpower. You could see workforce right in here. Machine is the one that's missing. Material, method, and measurement is the type of tool we might use. Again, just a different terminology for a fishbone diagram. You're going to follow this structure here, and you're going to address these problem statements, the workforce challenges, the methods, the materials, and the measurements, and then provide some type of explanation. And again, that PowerPoint template's going to help you to get an alignment for that. But again, and I can't stress this enough, make sure you do the readings first so that you understand how to put one of these things together. I encourage you to do this one first, because it's probably going to be a little easier for you to put it together, and it could potentially be kind of that foundation to a story which you're going to need to create for your assignment, which is actually, if we go through order, this is the first assignment that pops up, or milestone 5 presentation, we'll call it. So one is a milestone, project 2 milestone, and the other one here is a presentation. Okay, so for the presentation this week, you've been hired as an IO consultant to create or implement an equity, diversion, inclusion, belonging EDBIB program. Notice what it says here. It's dealing with serious problems that are making workplace tense and affecting the company's performance. While there are some good things about companies, their issues is getting away on how they handle diversity and making everyone, etc., etc. So I'm just giving you a couple little tips in terms of making your life a little easier should you choose to accept that. Again, we'll see who's paying attention this week. But you're going to create a presentation on some of this information. Now, in this particular assignment, you're going to create the details yourself, some fictitious details, okay, related to the assignment. And you're going to create a compelling story utilizing the storytelling techniques that you learned about in the readings and the videos this week. So again, make sure you go through that information. There are 2 parts to this assignment. I want to stress that. 2 things that you're submitting that goes with this assignment this week. Make sure and read through all of this information a couple of times so you have thorough understanding. It's always good to read through the instructions twice so you have a clear understanding of what the expectations are. But in short, you're going to create a solid structure of the story where you have a beginning, a middle, and an end, okay? Kind of, here's what we're going to talk about, here's us talking about it, and here's the end, which essentially is a resolution to the story. The characters involved in the story, remember we had an organizational chart that went hand in hand with something else. Maybe you name some people, you've created your conflict, you've obviously done that with your bonefish diagram, and then you have some type of resolution that you're working on, which essentially is an initiative that you're doing. Here's what we want to implement within this company. Now, again, you're going to create a compelling story, gang. So part 2 of this, part 1 is to create a PowerPoint presentation. And let me stress to you that I encourage you to use the PowerPoint presentation for a few reasons. One is, you all have access to PowerPoint. Okay, if you didn't know that, you do. You all have access to the full version of PowerPoint that you can utilize for this in any class, anytime you might need to use PowerPoint. You are certainly welcome to utilize another tool if you choose, but keep in mind, if I have any problems opening it up or viewing it, or I can't see it inside of Brightspace where I need to see it, there is going to be some challenges. Make your life easy. Learn how to use PowerPoint if you don't already do. It is by far the most commonly used presentation tool on the planet, okay? There's a lot of other tools out there, but this one is probably the best in terms of usability and knowledge of use, and everybody knows how to use it, and everybody has access to it. So use PowerPoint. It'll be your friend. And I encourage you to learn and master PowerPoint because you'll probably be using it a lot throughout your career. So after you've created, you probably want a storyboard or create a little bit of draft in terms of a presentation that you want to create. You're going to be creating the slides, and then you're going to create a narrative, essentially what you would be saying, a script, if you will, that goes along with the individual slides. Okay, so you're going to tell your compelling story through your presentation with your visuals. Now, you don't have to actually physically present, but you're going to be playing it through in your mind a little bit as you're talking through this and identifying what it is that you're going to be saying for each one of the slides as the story progresses. Now, here's a couple things to keep in mind in terms of grading. I do a lot of submissions where students have to create a PowerPoint presentation, and maybe they have speaker's notes that go along with this. And I often tell students, this is not one of those times when I'm necessarily grading your presentation or what it is that you're saying in terms of how you're presenting the information. I'm more concerned about the details of the information that you've put into the presentation. That's not so much the case here. This particular presentation, I'm more concerned about what your slides look like. I'm more concerned about the story that you're telling. You're using proper storytelling techniques. You've identified the storytelling techniques that you've utilized, etc., within your presentation. And you can see the second part of the submission. I apologize here. Get rid of that one and pull this one up. Is where you're going to have this template here where you're going to add your narrative, add your story. So in other words, you have slide number 1, this is what I would be saying. Slide number 2, this is what I'd be saying, etc., etc. Now note it says here, copy the text for each additional slide to align with your presentation. Delete this note once complete. You can delete that extra thing right here. But essentially, you're going to have slide number, insert narration, because you're probably going to have more than 5 slides, perhaps 10 or 12 slides. You're going to have a cover page, you're going to have a reference page, and maybe 9, 10, 11 slides in the middle to really illustrate and talk about your story. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to do another video and send it out to you. Probably won't be that long, but it's going to talk you through some elements of PowerPoint presentations to help you get on track with that. Some of you might be a little more challenged with PowerPoint than others, but this is going to help give you some tips and insights to really make a PowerPoint presentation that pops. And this presentation I built specifically for this reason, and generically I use it in a lot of different classes. So keep that in mind. Last thing you're going to want to do is talk about the storytelling technique that you've used. If you're confused on that, it probably means you didn't do the readings, because there is an article this week that will specifically talk about the 8 different types of storytelling, the different techniques that you can utilize for that. So you're going to want to include that in there. And so with that, that's it. Easy peasy, right? Sounds like a lot, but it's really not as hard or as challenging as you might think it is right now. If you've paid attention to a couple of the tips that I've left in here, you're going to be well on your way to developing it. And certainly if you do that second assignment first, it's going to give you a foundation, something to build upon, kind of creating your story in the background, so to speak, you're going to have to add some key elements to it, things you're going to learn about in the readings this week, but it's certainly going to make it a lot easier for you. As always, if you do have some questions, reach out. And gang, this is not the week where you put everything off till the last minute, because again, you're going to need to do that foundational reading in order to put this together. You might want to also do a little bit of research or probably address some of those. There's probably some articles that we talked about in previous weeks that's going to help emphasize some key facts related to the challenges that you're going to uncover within this company as you're looking at the data. So include that stuff as well. But most of your readings this week is going to be related to how to do some of these things. And so it's not as hard as it looks, but make sure you get on it as soon as possible. And of course, make sure you finish anything you have outstanding from this previous week. Again, reach out if I could be of any support or assistance to your success this week. And as always, have a fantastic week. I look forward to seeing your submissions at the end of the week.